open doors are being slammed shut, where the welcome for refugees is hitting the buffers.
Now let's turn our attention to Europe. The continent is in crisis. Almost every country you go to, you'll hear the locals complain about the same thing: illegal migration.
With identity checks and increased police presence, border controls between Germany and France are back, and many residents are not happy with the new restrictions.
Ahmed is on the move. He's heading to the UK. He's running from Germany. Asylum application rejected. A deportation flight like this to Iraq was on the cards.
Picture this: Europe's economic powerhouse. The nation that once threw open its doors to the world, now pulling off one of the fastest immigration reversals in modern history. Germany, the country that told the planet, "Wir schaffen das." We can do this. But a decade later, it quietly decided it couldn't. In 2023, the numbers were staggering. 329,000 asylum claims, a bureaucracy stretched to breaking point, and deportation orders piling up faster than they could be enforced. Cities like Berlin and Munich were running out of space, patience, and political power. Angela Merkel's open-door legacy had turned into a revolving door that no one could shut. Then, almost overnight, everything changed. By mid-2025, first-time asylum applications had been cut in half. Border crossings collapsed. Deportation rates spiked. The same country once mocked for its humanitarian naivete had become Europe's most efficient deportation machine. This wasn't luck. It was design. Germany had quietly built a six-pillar system that re-engineered how a democracy could control migration, without rewriting its constitution, without quitting the EU, and without declaring a crisis. So, how did it happen? What laws, tactics, and controversies turned Germany from Europe's open door into its most fortified checkpoint? And more importantly, can any other country actually copy it? Because if Germany really did solve the migration crisis, then the rest of Europe is already studying the playbook. Let's run through the numbers quickly. As we said, in 2023, Germany received approximately 329,000 asylum claims. By 2024, that number had fallen to around 230,000 first-time applications, a 30% drop that sent shockwaves through European policy circles. But that was just the beginning. By the first quarter of 2025, applications had crashed even further. In June, the number of new applications was less than 7,000, a 60% decline from June 2024 numbers, and 70% from 2 years ago. And according to Euronews, this figure set a new record for the lowest monthly applications submitted since March 2013. So what was in Germany's toolkit? Well, their approach wasn't based on a single policy change, but more so a coordinated, multi-pronged strategy that addressed every aspect of the immigration system. Think of it as a six-pillar framework that systematically removed pull factors while seriously increasing enforcement capacity. Let's break them down. Pillar 1, total border control. Starting in October 2023, Germany made a decision that would have been unthinkable just years earlier. They reinstated border checks at all their land borders, not just the Austrian frontier that had been under scrutiny for years. We're talking about comprehensive controls across their perimeter with Austria, Czechia, Poland, Switzerland, and later extending to France, the Benelux countries, and Denmark. German police were empowered to turn people away immediately at trains, autobahns, and buses. The visual impact was immediate. Suddenly, crossing into Germany required actual documentation and investigation, something that hadn't been the case since the height of the Schengen Agreement's implementation. The psychological impact was huge. Word travels fast in migrant communities, and the message was clear. Germany was no longer an easy entry point into Europe's heartland. Pillar 2, the Return Improvement Act. On February 27, 2024, Germany passed legislation that fundamentally changed the deportation game. The Return Improvement Act wasn't just another bureaucratic reform. It was a complete overhaul of how Germany handles removals. The most significant change? Pre-deportation detention was extended from 10 days to 28 days. This might sound like a minor administrative tweak, but it solved one of the biggest problems in deportation policy: people simply disappearing before their removal could be executed. But the act went further. It gave authorities broader search powers. allowing them to search both persons and accommodation tied to removal proceedings. It also introduced entry and residence bans for those caught with fake papers, even after refusal at the border. The effect was immediate and measurable. Fewer people were able to run away before deportation, and authorities finally had the time and tools needed to execute removals effectively. Pillar 3, the payment card revolution. One of Germany's most innovative approaches was the introduction of the Bezahlkarte in November 2023, a payment card system that replaced cash benefits for asylum seekers. This wasn't just about administrative efficiency. It was a direct attack on what policymakers identified as pull factors. The card system limited ATM withdrawals, restricted remittances to home countries, and eliminated what officials called cash leakage, the phenomenon where cash benefits were being used for purposes other than direct support of asylum seekers within Germany. Now, implementation was patchy across different states by mid-2025, and this became a source of ongoing political debate. But where the system was active, officials reported significant reductions in what they termed irregular cash flows and more standardized support delivery. It sent yet another clear message. Germany was moving away from unconditional cash support toward a more controlled, monitored system of assistance. Pillar 4, Safe Country Fast Tracking. Germany's reclassification of Georgia and Moldova as safe countries of origin was a masterclass in bureaucratic efficiency. By labeling these countries as safe, Germany could process claims under accelerated procedures, making decisions in just 7 days rather than months or years that cases used to take. The numbers here are big. Georgia's asylum recognition rate in Germany was approximately 0.3%. That means virtually no Georgian asylum claims were being approved anyway, but they were still clogging up the system for months. By fast-tracking these cases, Germany could clear backlogs while sending a clear deterrent signal to potential asylum seekers from these countries. This approach wasn't limited to Georgia and Moldova. It represented a fundamental shift toward data-driven country classifications that prioritized processing efficiency. Pillar 5, Deportation at Scale. Perhaps the most controversial but effective element of Germany's strategy was the massive upscale of deportations and Dublin transfers. In 2024, Germany executed 20,084 deportations, a 25% increase over 2023. On top of that, they processed 5,827 Dublin transfers, moving asylum cases back to other EU states where applicants had first entered European territory. But here's where it gets really interesting. Germany partnered with Frontex to run charter flights, including innovative double destination runs that could deport people to 2 different countries in a single flight. This kind of operational efficiency had never been seen before in European immigration enforcement. The combined tally of removals, returns, turnbacks, and Dublin transfers reached 67,571 in 2024, the highest number since 2016. This wasn't just policy. It was industrial-scale immigration enforcement. Pillar 6, Legal Migration Channels. Crucially, Germany didn't just crack down on asylum abuse. They expanded legal migration channels for skilled workers at the same time.
In the future, we will focus more on the qualifications and professional experience of immigrants and less on formalities.
The reworked skilled immigration framework and the introduction of an opportunity card system aimed to funnel economic migration into legal pathways, reducing pressure on the asylum system. This dual approach, work visas yes, asylum abuse no, became vital to Germany's messaging. They weren't anti-immigration, they were pro-legal immigration and anti-abuse of asylum systems. Now here's where the story gets even more interesting, because implementing these 6 pillars was one thing, but would they actually work? Remember, we're talking about Germany, a country that had tried plenty of immigration reforms for years with limited success. Skeptics were everywhere. Critics argued that border controls would create chaos and that detention extensions would face court challenges. Even within Germany's own government, there were doubts. How do you suddenly reverse decades of migration patterns? How do you convince people who've already made the dangerous journey to Europe that Germany is no longer their destination of choice? How do you execute deportations at scale when the system had been failing to remove people for years? The answer came in the numbers. What Germany achieved wasn't just a policy success. It was a complete rewriting of what's possible in modern immigration control. Let's break down exactly what Germany achieved and which populations were most affected. Syrian asylum claims dropped by 50%. Afghan claims fell by 42%. Turkish claims plummeted by 61%. These weren't marginal adjustments. These were fundamental shifts in migration patterns affecting some of the largest asylum-seeking populations in Europe. But perhaps the most telling statistic is this. In 2024, 33,717 planned deportations still failed. Even with all these new tools and extended detention periods, Germany couldn't execute roughly 62% of planned removals. People still vanished, lacked travel documents, or won last-minute legal stays. This failure rate actually underscores how effective the policy changes were. If Germany could achieve such significant results while still failing to execute the majority of planned deportations, imagine what the numbers looked like before these reforms. Now, understanding what Germany did is one thing, but getting a solid grasp of how they did it is a whole different story. The implementation details show a level of administrative and political coordination that most countries have a tough time achieving. The border check expansion wasn't just about posting guards at crossings. Germany systematically mapped smuggling routes, coordinated with neighboring countries' intelligence services, and deployed technology that could process documentation quickly while maintaining traffic flow. They turned border control into a precision instrument rather than a blunt weapon. The Return Improvement Act required massive coordination between federal and state authorities. Detention facilities had to be expanded, legal procedures had to be streamlined, and cooperation agreements with origin countries had to be negotiated or renegotiated. The payment card rollout revealed the complexity of implementing seemingly simple policy changes. Different German states, Länder, had different approaches, different vendors, and different limitations on card usage. Some imposed geographical restrictions, others limited ATM access, and still others focused on preventing remittances. The patchwork implementation actually became a natural experiment in which approaches worked best. But the question is, can the country's model be copied by other European nations? Or was this a unique achievement that depended on Germany's specific circumstances? Well, the answer is both yes and no, and the details matter. Yes, the core tools are replicable. Border checks, detention extensions, safe country classifications, benefit restrictions, and scaled-up deportations are all policy instruments that other countries can and are beginning to adopt. Frontex-supported deportation charters are already expanding EU-wide, and several countries are implementing their own versions of payment card systems, like Russia, China, and India. But there are still significant limitations. In ways that smaller governments just cannot match, Germany's size, central location, and administrative capacity made it possible to deploy border checks quickly. A nation such as Estonia or Luxembourg lacks the capacity to abruptly enact extensive border controls at every point of entry. More importantly, Germany's approach required sustained political will across multiple government levels and political parties. The Return Improvement Act, for instance, required federal legislation, state-level implementation, local administrative cooperation, and sustained judicial support. That kind of coordinated political commitment is rare in democratic systems. There are also legitimate rights concerns that other countries will have to navigate. German courts have already challenged aspects of the new regime, particularly the use of phone data extraction for asylum seekers and the broader search powers granted to authorities. These legal challenges represent ongoing constraints on how far enforcement can be pushed. However, one of the most important questions about Germany's apparent success is whether the reduction in asylum applications represents genuine policy effectiveness or simply reflects broader European and global trends that would have happened anyway. German policy changes may not have been as significant as external geopolitical factors, such as changes in routes from Turkey, Balkan enforcement, or conditions in origin countries, as shown by data from the European Union Asylum Agency, which shows that EU-wide asylum applications started to decline around October 2024. This is a fair critique, and the timing is suspicious. Germany's most significant results appeared just as continental flows were cooling for reasons potentially unrelated to German policy. However, the German-specific data tells a more refined story. The decline in applications to Germany was steeper and more sustained than EU averages. suggesting that policy changes amplified underlying trends rather than just writing them. On top of that, the specific nationality breakdowns, with Syrian, Afghan, and Turkish applications falling at different rates, suggest targeted policy effects rather than just general trend following. Critics point to European Union data showing that EU-wide asylum applications began declining in 2024, with the bloc receiving approximately 1 million applications for asylum in 2024, representing a notable decrease of 11% compared to the previous year. Migration route data supports this broader trend, with the Western Balkans route seeing the largest decline at 66% from January 2024, while the Eastern Mediterranean route also saw fewer crossings with nearly 3,500 arrivals, a 21% decrease from the previous year. However, once again, the German-specific data tells a more precise story. While EU-wide, Syrian applications fell by 41% and Afghan applications dropped by 22%, Germany's declines appeared steeper and more targeted. The differential impact across nationalities is particularly telling. Syrian applicants had a recognition rate of 90% in 2024, while Afghan applicants were granted protection in 63% of cases, and Turkish applicants had a much lower recognition rate at just 17%. This variation in recognition rates suggests that Germany's policy changes, particularly the safe country classifications and fast-track procedures, could have had differential deterrent effects on different nationality groups, amplifying declines beyond what external factors alone would explain. The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Trends that were already starting because of outside influences were probably intensified by Germany's policy adjustments. However, that doesn't lessen the success of the policy. It demonstrates how sharp policy can magnify advantageous external circumstances to produce significant outcomes. But we're not done with the questions and concerns that came up. Whether this strategy can be maintained over time is arguably the most significant long-term challenge about Germany's immigration reform. Political sustainability depends on one thing above all: endurance. In democracies, immigration policy swings like a pendulum. One election brings enforcement, the next brings empathy. And when the political tide turns, what was once called control can suddenly be framed as a crisis of human rights. Germany's strategy depends on one thing politicians rarely control: endurance. Every election risks undoing what the last one built. Keeping the system running demands not just laws, but institutions strong enough to enforce them, and allies willing to cooperate. Deportations only work when origin countries take people back. Border checks only hold when neighbors agree to the same playbook, and both can vanish overnight with a single diplomatic shift. Then comes the question of adaptation. Over time, legal advocates, smuggling networks, and asylum seekers themselves will adjust to new enforcement strategies. As individuals get used to new systems, things that perform incredibly well in the short term often lose their effectiveness. But here's the kicker. Germany's transformation certainly didn't happen in a vacuum, and European leaders from Brussels to Budapest have been watching every move, taking detailed notes, and asking themselves one critical question: how quickly can we implement this playbook in our own countries? Simply put, Europe's policy debates are already being influenced by Germany's strategy. It's plain and apparent. Many aspects of the planned EU Migration Pact, which is scheduled to be fully implemented by 2026, are modeled after German moves, especially in the areas of faster processing and border processes. However, Germany's model also poses important queries regarding burden sharing and European solidarity. Instead of addressing the root causes of migration pressures, the rise in Dublin transfers and border turnbacks may cause asylum seekers to relocate to other EU nations. Tensions with nearby nations that now have to deal with migrants that Germany would have previously handled could result from this. The payment card approach, in particular, is being closely watched. If proven effective in Germany, similar systems could spread quickly across Europe, fundamentally changing how asylum seeker support is delivered continent-wide. Shifting our attention ahead as one reflects upon the changes in immigration policy, Germany presents a number of considerations for both analysts and policymakers. First, Germany proved that real change doesn't come from isolated fixes. It comes from integration. The breakthrough wasn't a single law or headline policy. It was how every piece, borders, benefits, deportations, diplomacy, was synchronized to move in the same direction. Cohesion. not chaos, made the difference. Second, administrative capacity matters a lot. Policy changes on paper mean nothing without the institutional ability to implement them effectively and consistently. Third, external factors may play a part too. The timing of external factors strengthening Germany's reforms surely played a part in their success. The external timing of when changes are made often dictates success just as much as the changes themselves. Fourth, sustainability requires both political commitment and operational flexibility. The most effective policies are those that can be maintained over time while adapting to changing conditions. Finally, democratic constraints are real and must be navigated carefully. Germany's approach has faced legal challenges and will continue to face judgment from courts, civil society, and international observers. Long-term success requires balancing enforcement effectiveness with legal and humanitarian obligations. So, where does this leave us? After dissecting Germany's six-pillar strategy, examining the absurd results, and exploring whether this approach can spread across Europe, we're left with one final question. What does Germany's success actually mean for the future of immigration policy? Germany's immigration transformation represents one of the most significant policy shifts in modern European history. In less than 2 years, they moved from Europe's most migrant-friendly major nation to implementing one of the continent's most comprehensive enforcement regimes. The results speak for themselves. Applications down by half, deportations up by a quarter, and a complete shift in migration patterns across multiple nationalities. But here's the crucial point. Germany's model should be seen as a blueprint, not a mirror. The specific tools, border controls, detention extensions, payment cards, safe country classifications, scaled deportations are available to other nations. However, the coordination, timing, and political commitment required to implement them effectively are a lot harder to replicate. For years, European leaders claimed that huge reductions in asylum applications were impossible without abandoning humanitarian commitments. Germany's experience proves otherwise. With sufficient political will and administrative capacity, democratic societies can achieve significant immigration control while maintaining legal frameworks. Whether this approach can be sustained long-term and replicated across different contexts remains to be seen. But Germany has definitely proven that intense immigration policy change is possible, if leaders are willing to make the necessary commitments. The question now determining Europe's future: do other nations have the will and capacity to follow Germany's lead? Or was this a unique achievement unlikely to be replicated elsewhere? The answer may shape European immigration policy for decades to come. What about how Bulgaria solved the immigration crisis?